We say things like, maybe later, perhaps another time, or I'll see you tomorrow. But for some of us, there won't be a tomorrow. Listen as your worst nightmares come to life. These nightmares have become someone's reality. My name is Justin Crowley, and this is The Murder Project. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 46 of The Murder Project. We are back, and we are bringing you a new case this week. Also, I'd like to point out that we have some new additions to the show. I am going to wait until Mike is here on the next episode to kind of talk about some of those in depth, but you are going to hear a few of the things kind of come in and out of the episode as we go. Breaking into it this week, we are going to be talking about a very interesting case and one that I feel has a lot of twists and turns and is pretty confusing, as most of ours are. We are talking more specifically about the kidnap and murder of Holly Lynn Bobo and everything that kind of transpired in that whole case. There is a lot of things that were going on, and I feel like a lot of inconsistencies with some things that kind of happened in that case. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's get the episode started. All right, we have a very interesting case. As I mentioned, this is the case of Holly Lynn Bobo and the kidnapping and murder of Holly. So the way that this all kind of starts out is we have a lot of different characters that are going to come up in this episode. As I mentioned, we have a case that is basically kind of a missing persons case turned homicide case. Whenever they start digging through some of the information that they find, and when they eventually start getting to some of the arrests that are made. Now, where I find this to be a little bit interesting is how the arrests come about, how the confessions are made, and how they get eventually to the trial that finds some of these people responsible for the murder. So this case all begins on April 13th, 2011. And what we have is a normal day for Holly Bobo. She is at this time a nursing student, and she is almost finished with school, or she's getting through the processes of school. And on April 13th, Holly wakes up. It's around 4:30 in the morning, and the reason she gets up so early is because she has to study for an upcoming exam. Now, what we do know is that in the process of Holly getting up, her mother is getting ready for work. Her father's getting ready for work. They see her in the morning going about her routine as she's studying for this final exam. Around 7:30 a.m., we know that Holly received a phone call from her boyfriend. His name is Drew Scott, and he was out turkey hunting at Holly's grandmother's property. Previous to this, Holly's grandmother had just passed away, but Drew had permission to be at the property, and apparently there were some people stopping by to see what he was doing there and if he indeed did have permission to be there. So basically, the reason for this phone call, from what we understand, is that Drew was trying to kind of double check with Holly and make sure that she knew and that the parents knew basically that he had permission to be out there, so that if anybody did call, if someone called him into the police or some scenario like that, they would be able to verify that he did, in fact, have permission to be out there. Right after this, Holly also gets a phone call, or makes a phone call, to one of her classmates. And I would assume that they are probably talking about their upcoming exam. And apparently this is a big deal for Holly because she's up at 4:30 in the morning studying for the exam. Now, I know from a few friends that I had that went through a bachelor's of nursing program here where I'm at, they kind of went through the school in phases. So if you did not pass a particular phase, you were washed out of the class, or you had to restart that particular phase. I don't know if it's like that for all of the places, but I do know that there is a lot of pressure put on the students to make sure that they are learning the material and progressing with the rest of the group. So let's fast forward. We are around 7:45 in the morning, and it is said that this is around the time that they think Holly would be leaving to go to class. She usually runs a few errands, stops at a few places, maybe gets a coffee, does something like that. But either way, she's getting ready to leave her home. Now, before this happens, before Holly gets to leave the house, there is a interaction that occurs with her and an unknown person. Now, her neighbor that lived next door to them went outside and said that he could hear somebody screaming and he didn't know what was going on. So this neighbor calls Holly's mother, Karen, and asks if there is something going on or to let her know that something is going on. Now, at the same time this is happening, her brother Clint is at the house, but he is still asleep when all of this kind of starts. Clint, he wakes up when he hears the family's dog barking. He doesn't wake up when Holly starts arguing with this unknown person, but he does wake up when he hears the dogs barking, and he says that he can see Holly outside with a man who is dressed in camouflage. One of the interesting things that he points out is that Holly appeared to be kneeling down, and he thought that Holly was kneeling down speaking to her boyfriend, Drew Scott. Now, one of the things he says is that it looks like they were kneeling down, facing each other in the garage area, and that they were talking back and forth. He does mention that Holly does sound upset and a little heated. He's thinking that while this is happening, that Holly is outside having a conversation with her boyfriend, and possibly they are breaking up or they are fighting about something. While this is happening, as I mentioned, the neighbor is calling Holly's mom, Karen, to see if she knows kind of what's going on. When Karen gets the call from the neighbor, she already knows that it can't possibly be Drew, because when Drew called Holly earlier in the morning, just 10 minutes before this happened, he also called Karen to make sure that she also knew and verified that he was there on the property, on the grandmother's property, turkey hunting. He was kind of tying up all his loose ends to make sure that if someone called, they knew that he had permission to be there. Drew has already spoken to Karen, Holly's mom. And so Karen knows that because of the distance between their home and where the land is that Drew is hunting on, there's no way that he could have got from that land over to their house to be having this conversation with Holly in the driveway. So her instincts kick in, and she's like, oh man, we have to call the police or let somebody know what's going on. Well, as all this is kind of unfolding, Holly's brother, Clint, calls Karen, and he says, hey, Holly's still here. Is she not going to school today? I thought she had an exam. She's out in the garage with Drew. They're arguing about something. And this would kind of make sense if Clint knew that Drew was supposed to be hunting, because he says the man is dressed in camouflage. So he's kind of making this connection with himself. He's kind of tying this in to himself to kind of make this be Drew without really thinking about what's going on, because we're not all thinking the worst scenario is about to unfold. Karen tells Clint, no, that's not Drew. There's no way that that's Drew. He's at the land hunting. That has to be a stranger. We need to let the police know. And she even makes mention, get a gun and shoot the man. Whoever this person is that Holly's arguing with, she knows it can't be something good. So she says, hey, you need to go out there and shoot the guy. Clint says to his mother, Karen, you want me to go shoot Drew? And he's still confused about what's going on. He still doesn't understand that the person that his sister is arguing with is not her boyfriend. He still hasn't made that connection. Karen gets either frustrated or something happens and she hangs up on Clint because she knows that time is ticking. She's on the clock. She needs to make some moves here to save her daughter. She calls 911, and when she calls 911, she is at work at a school in a different area than she lives. So the 911 call is routed to the area that she's in, as it's typically done. And she realizes that while she's on this phone call, that she has the wrong police department or sheriff's department. And so they have to either transfer her or she has to call the sheriff's department, police department where she lives. And once she gets a hold of them, she lets them know, something's going on. You need to go save my daughter. Because when she's on the phone with Clint, Clint is now saying that Holly and Drew, because he thinks that this is the boyfriend, are last seen walking into the woods close to their house. And that is why Karen's alarm bells go off, because she's like, why would Holly be walking into the woods with a strange man? Oh my God, somebody kidnapped my daughter. Somebody took her. So she says this to the police. She says, somebody got my daughter. They took her. You need to go help her. Please get there as fast as you can. Go, 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 go. You should listen to some of the footage that they have, the live footage on this, because you can tell she is in a real panic, that it is authentic. When the police get there, they find Holly's brother, Clint, who has gone outside with a pistol. He took the orders from his mother to get a gun and go outside and shoot the person. When he goes outside, he kind of makes the connection that something's going on here, and he goes outside, but they're gone. Holly's nowhere to be seen. The man that she is with is also nowhere to be seen. When the police get there, they notice that there are blood stains in the garage. They will later determine that this blood does belong to Holly. And in the process of Clint going outside, he also calls 911. But what they don't find is any evidence that points to where Holly went. So what they do is they try to trace Holly's phone. And whenever they get the ping on Holly's phone, they are able to tell that she does, at this point in time, still have her phone with her. And based on the pings from her phone, she is heading north away from her house. As they continue to watch the pings, the phone continues to go north through a wooded area and up to Interstate 40. I-40 also runs through the area that I am from. Now, as they continue to watch the pings from Holly's phone, after about 20 or 30 minutes, the ping stops. So they are thinking that Holly has also stopped. Then the ping picks back up, and Holly is thought to have been traveling in a south direction using a different route. And one of the things that Clint points out in his statement is that when they walked off, they went to a kind of a trail that led out to some logging roads around where he lives. So originally they're thinking they're on some sort of trail system that goes out to a logging road that takes them out to Interstate 40. Now, the last time that Holly's phone pings, it's in an area where later on her phone is going to be found. Now, there's some interesting things that happen with this phone, and I'll discuss them as we get into some of the evidence. Now, when the police are talking to Clint, he says that the person Holly was talking to was a male, approximately 5'10" to 6 foot tall, weighing approximately 180 to 200 pounds. And this person had dark hair that stuck out from underneath his cap, that it was long enough to cover his neck and touch the collar of his shirt. He said the man was wearing a hat, camouflage clothes from head to toe, and he thought that the pattern of the camouflage was mossy oak breakup or a leafy type wear. He described the male voice that he heard to be a deep and low voice. So after this kind of description is put out, they start searching the area. In the initial search of the area, they don't find a whole lot, but later on, they do find several items that belong to Holly that were scattered throughout the town. And this is an interesting deal because we've heard about evidence from somebody that's scattered about town in a previous case that we've done. And one of the reasons I think that they do this is to try to throw off anybody that is looking into the disappearance of the person. It's hard to track down where somebody has been or where they're going if all of the information is scattered about in different places. Some of the things they do find, though, however, are her lunchbox, a receipt with her name on it, her card from school, her cell phone, the SIM card, and a driver's license. Now, when I was talking about the cell phone and the SIM card earlier, the weird thing about that is when the ping stops after Holly starts traveling south, or what they perceive to be Holly traveling south, they find the cell phone discarded on the side of the road. And what they say is that it looks like it was placed there. But one of the interesting things about this is that the SIM card had been removed and some of the contacts in her phone had been tampered with. Now, the interesting thing I think about this pertaining to the SIM card is that it was across the road from where the phone was found, but the police were able to find the SIM card. And the reason I thought this was kind of interesting was because I dropped my SIM card in my phone in my office one day and I couldn't find it. It literally took me 15 minutes to find this little tiny SIM card. And if you've never taken out or had to transfer your SIM card, if you get a new phone, it's very tiny. It's kind of a hassle to get it in and out of the phone if you don't know what you're doing. After you mess with it a little bit, it's not as bad. But the first time you're messing with this thing, you're not really sure how to get it in and out. You're not really sure what direction it goes in. But going to removing the SIM card and then tossing it across the road, it is still found. I thought that was an interesting part because that is a tiny piece of evidence that they were able to locate. Now, I'm not saying that it is pointing at someone or individuals with law enforcement and their involvement or anything like that. I'm just saying that it was awkward the way that the SIM card was removed from the phone, discarded, but then both of those items were found on the side of the road. So in this investigation, in the early parts of it, you have the area where Holly lives at. And I think I forgot to mention this, but Holly lives in Darden, Tennessee. And so you're going to have local law enforcement from that area looking for Holly. And then later on, they ask for the TBI or the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations to help out with the case. And in the beginning, as I mentioned, there's not a whole lot that goes on. After the SIM card is removed from Holly's phone, they don't have a whole lot of information about where she went or what happened to her. And the case kind of goes cold. And that is until a man is arrested on a different charge, but he agrees to talk to police and give them information about another case in hopes that they'll be a little bit lenient on him. And what happens in that scenario is there's not an actual date that kind of ties into this, but I know that it is sometime before September 2014. And what happens is there is a man named Dylan Adams, and he is arrested, as I mentioned, on an unrelated weapons charge. Now, while he is being interrogated or after he is arrested, he tells the cops that he has information about Holly Bobo's disappearance. And of course, the police are going to want to talk to him. So what he tells police is that on April 13th, 2011, which is the date that Holly disappeared, he went to his brother, Zach Adams' house to pick up his truck. Now, his brother Zach lives at this house with a man named Jason Autry. And he tells police, Dylan anyways, tells police that he observed, which is in quotations, and I find that kind of strange because you'd be like, hey, I saw somebody over there. But either way, he says that he observed Holly sitting in a green chair at Zach and Jason's house and that she was wearing a pink t-shirt, and he saw Jason in the house standing next to Holly. He also tells police that his brother was wearing camouflage shorts, a black cutoff t-shirt, and a pair of Crocs. And one of the things that we found out later on in the investigation is they found shoe prints belonging to a pair of Crocs at the scene of the crime when Holly was abducted. So they're thinking that there is a connection here. I also find it a little strange that he remembers that his brother was wearing Crocs. However, Dylan says that Zach told him that he had raped Holly and he videotaped it. And this is what kind of jumpstarts their investigation into this a little further. I wish I had the details on when this actual interview took place, because we know that Holly went missing in 2011, and we're going to have several years in between some arrests and other things that are involved in this case. And I'll kind of get into some of that. So after Dylan has this conversation with the police are able to determine that Zach Adams, Jason Autry, and another man named Shane Austin were involved in this disappearance and what they believe now is a murder. What Dylan tells them is that basically he goes to the house. Holly's there against her will, so you have kidnapping. He says that his brother, Zach, admitted to sexually assaulting Holly, so you have a sexual assault. And then Dylan says that she has been killed, that they killed her after this. And they use phone records to kind of indicate that Shane was with Zach and Jason based off of phone calls that they had, that they'd been talking back and forth. And so their initial belief in all this, and it's hard to figure out how they got from A to B, is that Shane Austin helped Zach Adams and Jason Aubrey dispose of the body, and that he's somehow involved in this. So they use this information to get arrest warrants for all three of these individuals. Now, after the arrests are made, Dylan is unable to keep his story straight. He later recants his confession and says that basically he was coerced into giving this confession, that he did not have any evidence to offer towards this case. And the prosecutors basically say that he's not trustworthy in this whole thing, but they do have enough information to go ahead and move on with the case. And that is until September of 2014, when partial remains are found in a wooded area, and they are able to determine that these remains do belong to Holly Bobo. We have the original 2011 date. Fast forward to 2014. Somewhere in here, before the body is discovered, Dylan says that he has information about the disappearance and murder of Holly. He implicates his brother, his brother's roommate, Jason, and their friend, Shane Austin. And while all this is kind of taking place, they're discrediting Dylan, but they find Holly's body. Now, the way that kind of went down is that there were some guys out that were hunting for or searching for ginseng root. They were in a wooded area north of Decatur County, Tennessee. This is just off of I-40, 20 miles from Darden, Tennessee, where Holly lived. The men that found Holly's remains did not have permission to be on the land that they were at, but the person who owned the land said that it was pretty common for people to wander about his property without permission. The reason I bring that up is because the owner of the land was not the person that found the remains of Holly, and I just want to make that distinction. But the man that did find Holly's remains says that he saw a large bucket in the woods. He went over, pulled the bucket up. The rest of the details are kind of scattered, but he says that in this process, he finds the remains of someone. More specifically, he finds a skull. And with the skull are some teeth, several ribs, and a shoulder blade. And when they look at the skull, they see that there what appears to be a bullet hole in the back right portion of the head. The trajectory is going left, and the entrance wound is what looks like to me behind the right ear, and then it goes through the left cheekbone when it exits, going from right to left. Now, when I was looking at this in the original photos from the trial, I wasn't able to tell if this person who shot Holly was standing right behind her or if she was in a position where she was knelt down. And the reason I say that is because I was wondering if she was shot execution style or if she was standing up and the person who shot her walked up behind her, stuck the gun to the back of her head over by her right ear, and pulled the trigger. I don't know if we will be able to determine that. I'm sure there is some speculation about how this went through, but if it was sort of a execution style shooting, I would have expected the entry wound to be a little higher on top of the skull and not so far down. So the way that I looked at it is it looked like if she was kneeling, then the person that shot her would have been down at her level, or she was standing up and was shot and she fell over, or however that scenario went down. Because what we'll find out later is we're not going to get a whole lot of information as far as all of that is concerned. Now, after the body's found, TBI The Tennessee Bureau of Investigations continues to look into this. And when it's all said and done, there are going to be a total of 6 people arrested in this case. You're going to have Dylan Adams arrested. He was the one that originally gave them the information, which they said later he recanted and they said he was not credible. Zach Adams, who was at the house where his brother says he saw Jason, Aubrey, and Holly at. Then you're going to have Shane Austin, who is supposed to be an accomplice. And then later on, you're going to have Jeff and Mark Percy, who are brothers that also get arrested, who they say tampered with evidence or helped destroy evidence in this case to help out their friends, Zach and Jason. Now, whenever this all starts to unfold and they discredit Dylan, as I mentioned earlier, and he recants his story, they move to Shane Austin, the police that is. They move to him and they say, hey, listen, we know that all this stuff's going on, but we want to offer you a deal. We're going to give you complete immunity if you give us the information regarding the location and information of Holly Bobo's body. And this is before they found the body, but they're already in the process of cutting deals with people after they discredit Dylan. They're already in the process of setting things up. When they find Holly's body, they are in a position where they have a little bit more leverage. And basically, in this process, they discredit Shane as well, saying that he's unwilling to cooperate. Shane never took them to the location of where Holly's body was later found. And in all of this, they say, hey, the deal's off the table. You're back in the pool of suspects with everybody else. And there's going to be kind of a battle that ensues between Shane's attorney and the DA's office, because Shane has already been talking to the investigators and the district attorney's office. In this immunity deal, he's trying to help them in ways that he thinks will get him kind of off of the radar, out of the way. They can move on to somebody else. He is not able to do any of this for them, so they're going to kind of cut him loose. They're going to say, hey, listen, you didn't give us any information, so you're back in the pool with everybody else. But his attorney is basically saying, no, he was trying to help you guys, so we don't want you to be able to use any of the information that he gave you against him. So that already right there is the start of just a huge mess. And as I mentioned earlier, Dylan's already been discredited. So now you have 2 people that are originally involved in this case that have offered up information that they later will go back and say, we can't use any of this information. They've either changed their stories, recanted stories, or they're not credible. And it starts to get really confusing after this. And that's why I'm trying to tie all this together. But because of the dates that go into this and the information that is given, there's kind of a weird void in the time that all of this is taking place. Now, let's go ahead and talk about Jeff and Mark Percy so that we can kind of get them out of the way. As I mentioned earlier, they were charged with accessories after the fact and tampering with evidence. Now, after they were arrested, Jeff's former roommate, a woman named Sandra King, says that she saw the video of Holly being sexually assaulted and crying, and told police that she had only watched a clip, that Jeff had shown her this video, and they wanted to kind of put Sandra in a position where she could set Jeff up and get him to say something incriminating. So they had her call Jeff and basically say, hey, you remember that video we saw, that video of Holly? If it had been you in the video, I would have watched it. And to which Jeff replies, I know. And in this kind of whole allegation that Sandra is saying against Jeff, she says that Jeff's brother Mark is the one who shot the video. So to me, you have a situation where, okay, the police are looking at this and they're saying, okay, so Jeff was at some point in possession of this video that shows Holly being sexually assaulted. Now, does this tie in with what Dylan said originally, that his brother Zach sexually assaulted Holly? Because remember, when he first came to the cops, even though he's basically recanted his story, he says that his brother told him that he raped Holly. So, in my opinion, they're kind of tying these two events together, even though the story that Dylan gave the police is no longer useful because he recanted his story. And then at the same time, Sandra is tying in Mark's brother, saying that he's the one that shot the video. Now, the reason I wanted to bring this up right now is because later on, they are not going to be able to basically prove that any of this happened. Because regardless of if you use this as evidence saying that Sandra saw this video that Jeff showed her and that Mark is the one that shot the video, and then you tie that in to Dylan saying that he was told by his brother, Zach, that he sexually assaulted her, there's no video. So it doesn't matter which kind of scenario you go with here. The end result is that there never is a video that's found showing any of this information. Eventually, the DA's office has to drop charges against Jeff and Mark both. And what they are later going to claim is that Sandra had a son who was in prison, and she was trying to work with the cops to give them evidence against these guys because that was kind of her only connection into this whole scenario, because Jeff and Mark knew the other accused men, and this was her way of trying to get a deal to reduce her own son's sentence and try to get him out early. That's what the allegation is. That's kind of what the rumors are. In all of this, you're probably asking yourself, so what evidence do we have so far? What do we have that is going to get somebody convicted of a crime? And I'm here to tell you that it's not much. What we do have is we have the initial call stating that Holly was kidnapped or taken from her home against her will. We have an unknown person that has taken her. We have the evidence of her belongings scattered about, the cell phone, the SIM card. We don't have any DNA evidence that ties any of these items to a specific person. Later on, the body of Holly is found, the remains, and off of that, they are able to determine the way that they think Holly died with the gunshot wound. Later on, there will be someone that is a lawyer for one of the accused that says that you can't actually prove if that was done before or after she died, but that it did happen. But in that whole scenario where the body was found, there was also no further evidence or DNA that links anybody who has been arrested to this case. So it is very circumstantial. It is solely based on statements of people that are pointing fingers at people saying, no, this is what happened. No, this is what happened. No, this is what happened. Because right now we have several different stories that are all in motion, and it doesn't seem like we're really kind of getting to one specific story that we're going to go with. But we do know that somebody has to be involved. These guys look pretty good for the crime. We're going to go ahead and go with it. And not only that, but one of the people involved, Jason Autry, says that he is willing to cut a deal now with the DA's office to explain what happened. That in this whole thing, we have another somebody that now wants to cut a deal. So originally it's Dylan, then it's Shane, now it's Jason. But the interesting thing about this is that no matter who you put it to, who you take the information from, it's never Zach Adams that is even offered a deal or is not pointed to the person who committed the crime. So that is one interesting thing I find that kind of goes towards the DA side, is that it doesn't matter who's kind of telling the story. Zach Adams is always kind of the guy that they're saying is the orchestrator or kind of ringleader of this whole deal. So before we get to some of the trials that are going to start to take place and how they're going to kind of work this out, I just want to kind of update everybody on what's happening here, because we have a lot going on and it's kind of compressed into a short amount of time because remember, we always have the debrief where we break the cases down further. The first court date is going to be in September of 2017. The body's found in 2014, and that's kind of when all these arrests are taking place and things are happening. Now, if you remember, originally, Shane Austin was offered an immunity deal in exchange for information, which turned out to be nothing. And they kind of went back and forth saying that he was still going to be a suspect in the case because they believed that he helped out Zach and Jason in this whole ordeal. So they kind of went back and forth. But Shane is going to be taken out of the picture in February of 2015, where in Bartow, Florida, his body is found. And from what the evidence points to, Shane has committed suicide. Now, later on, Shane's attorneys are going to blame this suicide on continual threats from prosecutors, as well as a quote unquote witch hunt style investigation where they relied on rumors instead of actual evidence. And Shane's attorney insists that he had nothing to do with the murders and cooperated fully with police. But with Shane being out of the picture now, they are going to basically move on without him and see if they can lock in a conviction, at least for some of the people that are involved. Because as I mentioned earlier, Jeff and Mark Percy are now removed from this investigation. Shane is now deceased, but we still have 3 of the 6 originals that are left. You have Dylan Adams, his brother Zach Adams, and Jason Autry. Jason Autry is going to now be the district attorney's office key witness. He is going to tell his story about what happened, and they're going to cut him a pretty sweet deal as far as his sentence goes for giving them this information. But when it gets time to go to trial, Jason's story is just a little bit different than everybody else's. And everybody else has kind of a different story as far as all of this is concerned. And we're going to break down all of the different stories and the connections and everything in the debrief. But I will tell you that Zach Adams is the first to go to trial. He's the one that they believe is the ringleader in all of this, and that this trial is going to be largely circumstantial. And as I mentioned, there's no DNA or forensics, but they're going to let Jason get on the stand and tell them what happened. So what Jason says, and this is different than the story that Dylan says, but he says, well, I wasn't involved at all with the abduction, and he wasn't involved with anything as far as the sexual assault goes. All he was there to do was help Zach dispose of a body. He says that he went over to Shane Austin's house and he was looking to score some drugs, because one of the things I haven't brought up in this is that everybody involved in this case, basically from start to finish, except for Holly, is apparently, and her family, is apparently huge into meth. And they are all kind of labeled as meth heads. And so Jason says that he went over to Shane's house to score some drugs. And while he was there, he saw Shane and Zach, and they had a body in a truck that was wrapped in a multicolored blanket, and that Shane was disposing of evidence in a burn barrel. Jason further claims that he agreed to help Zach dispose of the body. So what he said is that they were going to drive along the Tennessee River and stop at an underpass under I-40, and that they were going to dump the body in the water. But one of the things that Jason brings up in trial, and it's really kind of hard to watch if you go back and check it out, is that he tells a story about being with a friend or a relative, and that person told him that they had found a body one time floating in the river, and that the only thing that was holding the body up from going underwater is the intestines that were bloated and floating on top of the water. So their plan in all this is to gut the body, as he says. So they're going to take Holly out to this river, and they're going to gut her and then dump the body. Now, Jason says after they unloaded the body from the truck, they realized that Holly was still alive. So Zach took out a pistol and shot her in the head. And what Jason says is that he was scared that the noise from the gunshot might have attracted attention. So they load Holly's body back up and they get back in the truck. And Jason says that he has Zach drop him back off at his house, and that he later learned that Zach had dumped the body near a place called Kelly Ridge. And this is going to be a different location than where Holly's body is actually found. So they aren't able to piece together how the body ended up where it was ultimately found, but they said that it could have been moved, and so Jason's story should still be credible. So there's still this question of, well, how did all of this end up taking place? Why was anybody over at Holly's house to begin with? Well, Jason's got a story for that as well. And what he says is that originally Dylan, Zach, and Shane were going over to the Bobo's residence, but that they were going there to teach Holly's brother Clint how to make methamphetamine. This is something that Clint says is absolutely 100% not true, but before Shane could get to the house, and now Shane can't answer for himself because he is deceased, but before Shane got to the house, he encountered Holly in the carport area. And what Jason says is that Holly starts screaming and hollering, and so they had no choice but to abduct her. And what the prosecution is now saying is that Shane is the one that Clint originally described seeing walking into the woods with Holly, because he is the only person who is basically close to the size of the man that is described. Because one of the things we'll get into later is that in the debrief is that none of these men matched the description so far of what Clint gave them. But later on, after basically Shane is not able to speak for himself, the DA's office says, well, he's the closest resemblance to the person that Clint thought he saw. So after this, Jason says that the three men raped Holly in a barn that was owned by the grandmother of both Shane and Jason, and that one of the ways that they tried to tie this all together with Shane specifically is that two pieces of paper that belonged to Holly, a receipt and a note card, were found on the road where Shane lived at, and the receipt specifically was found 75 feet from Shane's driveway. Some evidence that they also used to try to tie Zach into this is that Zach owned a white pickup, and this is the same type of truck that the neighbors said they saw leaving the area on the morning that Holly was taken. There was also some witnesses that came forward and said that Adams made, and by Adams I mean Zach, made statements implicating himself in Holly's disappearance. And at one point, one of Zach's girlfriends said that she heard him say he would tie me up like he did Holly and nobody would ever see me again. And also that Zach had allegedly threatened his brother after the arrest and said that he would put him in a hole beside her if he didn't keep his mouth shut. So there's a lot of different kind of things that are spiraling around. But one of the things that they did in the trial of Zach is that they said that it was a .32 caliber handgun or possibly a little lower that was the murder weapon used against Holly based off the size of the hole in Holly's skull. So during the trial, there was a .32 caliber Smith & Wesson long revolver that was introduced into evidence, and they got this from a local man who led police to the gun, saying that Zach and Shane sold him this weapon at some point in time in exchange for drugs. Now, the gun was reportedly found in a water area, and the forensic testing that was done on the weapon did not give any evidence to the case. So there was no DNA or fingerprints on the weapons that they could use to point to either Zach, Dylan, or Jason. So this gun was presented as evidence as a .32 caliber weapon. The way they tied that in is saying that it looked and appeared that a .32 caliber handgun had been used, and there was no evidence to really point that there, but it was introduced into evidence. So basically, all this is circumstantial, and it's going to be left up to the jury as far as Zach Adams is concerned. After the jury goes to deliberate, they come back and they find Zach guilty on all charges. Those charges include first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, and aggravated rape. And on September 23rd, 2017, Zach was sentenced to life in prison without parole and 2 consecutive terms of 25 years for both the kidnapping and the sexual assault. So this kind of case for Zach is, this point, it's over for him. He's going to jail for life. But what about the rest of the guys? Well, Zach's brother, Dylan, on January 18th, 2018, basically he pled guilty to the charges, but not actually pleading guilty to the charges. He did what's known as a Alford plea, where he doesn't admit to the criminal act and says he's innocent, but believes that if he went to trial, the result would be that he was found guilty of the crime he was accused. So he puts in an Alford plea, and he was basically convicted of the first-degree murder and the kidnapping, but nothing about the sexual assault. He was sentenced to 15 years for facilitation of first-degree murder and 35 years for aggravated kidnapping. These sentences are set to run concurrent, and so he will have to serve at least that 35-year sentence or be eligible for parole on that 35-year sentence before he can actually get out. Basically, the 15-year is kind of a wash because he has the 35-year, but either way, he's convicted and sentenced to 35 years in prison. Now, Jason, on the other hand, he gets a little bit sweeter deal in this plea bargain. And I assume that, I'm not sure exactly the date on which he went into jail and when he made this agreement and pled guilty to the charges that he was accused of. But I assume that they're going to have him pretty much on this pathway before Zach goes to trial, so they can have this all squared away and done with. He gets a plea deal, he goes to jail, and then he's going to come back and testify against Zach. So either way that kind of went down, he is given kind of a sweetheart deal as far as his charges go. They include, and I believe it's going to be the same charges that Dylan had, the murder, the kidnapping, and the sexual assault. But he is only given 8 years prison time. And on September 16th, 2020, he is given time served for his crimes, and he is released from jail and back into the free world. Now, there is a lot of information that kind of goes into this case as far as the ins and outs of it. That's just kind of the brief summary of it. I know that it was kind of here and there, but like I said, the information that is given on the case, if you research it, is kind of all over the place, and it makes it a little bit harder to kind of pin something down on this case specifically because the dates are a little wishy-washy as well. But before we come back next week and get you guys the debrief, we're going to go ahead and sort through all of this information and give you a little more detail as far as the involvements, quote unquote, of different people in the case. Also, how the police might have got to this conclusion, and were they right? Were they wrong? Was it a situation where a bunch of meth heads got framed for a crime? I'm not saying that specifically. Or was it the right people in the case were charged with the crime? It's just the evidence was a little light, so they had to go with what they had. Now, I was looking at this originally when I started kind of going through this, and I was reading it and I was looking at some of the information. I thought, wow, this kind of reminds me of the West Memphis 3. The way that the initial story comes out and they are going to use the information from somebody, but then that information is no good. So they're going to try to get somebody else. That information is no good. And then basically in this specific case, the third person that they talk to, which is Jason, is the one that they finally land a deal with that can put the two brothers, Zach and Dylan, in jail. And it's one of those things where I look at it and I think to myself, wow, this is it's kind of crazy the way that all of this went down. I'm not saying that these men are innocent. What I'm saying is that I like to look at the way the case unfolded. I like to look at the evidence, and I like to see how the investigators got from A to B. Now, for all I know, they have the right men in custody and justice was served. But that's not what we do here on the Murder Project. We like to break everything down. We like to look at it from both sides of the aisle, and that's what we intend to do. So I'm going to let you guys go for this episode, and I will talk to you guys soon on the debrief. Goodbye. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening to this episode of The Murder Project. Our numbers are going up, our downloads are going up, and we have you guys to thank for that. If you're looking for us on any of the social media platforms, you can find us on Facebook. We're at The Murder Project. If you need to search for us, you can type in facebook.com/podcasttmp. If you're looking for us on Instagram, we're at The Murder Project. And if you're looking for us on Twitter, we're at The Murder Pod. Also, don't forget to go over to whatever platform you're listening on, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if they have it. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, hit that subscribe button, leave us a review, and hit that 5 stars. We do appreciate it, and we thank you guys so much. If you have a longer form question or comment, you can always reach out to us. We have an email address. That email address is contact@themurderproject.com. And as always, Mike or myself will get back to you. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening to this episode of The Murder Project. I look forward to speaking to you very soon. But before I go, please remember, head up, eyes up,
and stay alive.